Welcome back to the Grim Workshop. Today we're going to bushcraft a button. Your first layer of protection against the outdoors is always going to be the clothes on your back. And if you pop a button off, not only is that a bad look, but your clothes don't work as effectively. So part of a long-term wilderness survival skill is being able to maintain your clothes. Now, a lot of the Grim cards have a button already on them, and that is really cool. So the sewing card does. There are several that have buttons or improvised buttons. But being able to craft one out of woods is a pretty cool skill, and B, it's almost a permanent fix. If you're prepared, you're probably carrying more than just a stack of Grim cards in the woods. You've probably got a knife and a saw as well. But what most people don't have with them, and it's kind of critical in making a button like this, is going to be an awl. Now there's several different styles of awls. This is a stitch awl here. So this is actually used to cut threads if you were opening a seam up or if you made a mistake sewing. I could certainly use the tip of this to make a buttonhole. So making a hole in wood thin as a button is not going to be that big of a task. You could probably do it with some of the thicker needles, but there are better tools on here that you probably wouldn't be carrying if it wasn't in your Grim cards. So this is the Joe Flowers card. He's got a drill on here. So that would be a really effective tool. But again, you could certainly use the knife tip. Any pointed tool would work, but it's going to be less effective. Now, the Bushcraft Kelso card's got a couple different options here. He's actually got a stitch awl, which is a little different. A stitch awl I could certainly use to make a hole in wood, but you can actually sew leather with that as well. So we're going to save that tool for another project. You've got a drill here, but you've always got to pay attention to the taper of it. You've got to use the appropriate size tool to give you the right size hole. There are a lot of different options, and you can just improvise this. Jordan Jonas has a stitch awl on his as well. But then really any pointed object, and if it's got an upswept knife tip, you're going to drill off center and you're not going to get as clean of a hole. Certainly an arrow tip is going to work out really well. The finer the arrowhead, the better. But if push comes to shove, any knife's going to work. A knife like this Wayne Russell, where it's dead center middle, not upswept, is going to give you a little bit better holes. And then we're going to need a saw as well. So you may have a folding saw on you. If you don't, we got you covered here as well. I'm going to probably grab one off the Bob Hansler card, but a lot of these cards have saws on them as well. Here's Callie Russell. She's got a little saw on hers. So you're going to need very little knife work on this. Maybe just peel the bark off, maybe just a little bit of carving. You're going to need a saw, and you're going to need an awl. If you pick a green stick, there's a pretty good chance it's going to crack as it dries. But you're also not going to want to pick something so dead that it doesn't have any strength anymore. You're going to want to pick something off the ground that's as close to the finished diameter of the button as you want. So I'm going to grab the saw off this Bob Hansler card here. And this stick behind me, right about here, that seems about the size button I'm after. So that first one I cut into didn't quite have the strength. This one here seems pretty decent. It's about as thick as my pinky. Now I'm going to slice down just about the width I want that button. That's pretty workable right there. We're going to take that back to the bench and we'll get the awl out. I brought that whole branch with me in case this splits out. You never quite know once you start going into the grain on a piece of wood how it's going to handle it. But I'm going to peel the bark off real quick before we get started and use whatever knife you've got. Because I used the saw on that Bob Hansler card, I'm going to use the knife as well. So the bark's off here. I'd like to thin this down a little bit more, but I'm not going to do that until I get the holes in. It's very likely that this splits out and it takes me a couple tries. I've got a lot of options to put holes in that button, but I'm going to go with this drill off the Joe Flowers card. The main thing I want is something with a fairly fine tip on it. And in this case, I'm just going to use this by hand. I could attach this to a stick if I was drilling through something a little bit larger, but this is going to be plenty. So you can see I'm barely starting to come out the other side. So at this point, I'm going to reverse it. I'm going to go on the other side. There you go. So you're going to need at least 2 holes. 2 holes is probably good enough, especially for a primitive button. If you're feeling lucky and you think you've got enough space on the button that you chose, you can certainly go to all 4 corners. So this drill does a really nice job, and it goes through actually really fast. The only thing you got to watch is making sure you leave space for your holes. This is the first one I did, and I actually was filming the short version of this video, and it just walked over a little bit. I was not paying attention, and I just don't have enough space for my second hole or my third hole or the fourth hole if I decide to go with it. So this would still work. I could drill a second one off center, but just take your time, make sure you place it and plan where all the holes are going to go. So you can see our 2 holes are a little bit different in size, and this has a taper to it, so the deeper you go, the larger it's going to be. You just want to make sure that it's large enough for the needle that you're using to go through it. So as long as your needle passes through there, it's big enough. That looks like a pretty nice button, and this thing does a really, really good job. Those holes are actually chamfered too, so that's not going to cut the thread. So at this point, you've got all your holes, and you've got no bark on it, so you can get your knife back out and just kind of hit any spots that look a little rough. Might want to take the edge off a little bit of the button. Any place that saw did not cut clean, just give it a real light hit. Now, a lot of the signature cards have sandpaper on them, and the sandpaper is really useful for sharpening knives, sharpening hooks, and in this case for crafting. So we just bushcrafted this button. There's nothing at all wrong with taking some sandpaper, cleaning it up, taking the edges down, and then we're going to be ready to sew it in the next video. So you can drill a hole with a knife tip, but not with that amount of precision. The proper tool is an awl for this, and Grimm has a lot of different options for you, and an awl is something that a lot of people overlook. And you can bushcraft one too. If you find a nail, you can beat on it with a rock or the pole of your axe. You can nap one out of stone, but it's a heck of a lot easier to carry one with you that would just slip down into your wallet, pull it off, use it, and then put it right back on your card. I did this whole project just using the saw, the knife, and the awl.